The Amash Project.
My name's Dave Starbuck, and welcome to another presentation from Revelation Tapes. His name is Dean Warwick. I was taught how to bring down the Twin Towers using nothing but infrasound. Really? We were made to study the experiments by the Russians, the Americans, and the British in the late 50s. In the late 50s? Late 50s. This was mid-60s when I was in the military. But here were these joint maneuvers being undertaken in the late 50s by these three superpowers then in the Eastern Bloc, bringing down 25-story buildings using nothing but sound wave infrasound. Good heavens.
We welcome the wonderful Dr. Judy Wood to the Amash Project on the Road series. This is a highly technical and detailed interview by the Amash founder Joanne Summerscales, shot at Northampton University with research colleague Andrew Johnson, just after their appearance at the Breakthrough Energy Conference in Hilversum, Holland. In order to get the very best out of this interview, it is strongly recommended that one gets across three basic items. The first is her book, Where Did the Towers Go? Evidence of Directed Free Energy Technology on 9/11. That's a big title. There's a great deal of information in this book. We're not trying to sell the book. Just get it, read it, and find out what's really going on. The second is our interview with Andrew Johnson, where we introduce this topic in Basis 12. It's called Where Did the Towers Go?
Initially, I found that I believed the official story of 9/11.
I have to say, I did at first, although it didn't feel right.
Right, but it was really by about 2003 that I became a bit more sceptical, having got a broadband internet connection, and I'd started to download several videos and looked at various websites that were springing up at that time. And I then came across a film called 9/11 The Great Illusion, which was made by a Texan called George Humphrey. And one of the central pieces in that video was the analysis of the so-called collapse of the Twin Towers.
Yes.
And by way of an introduction to the subject, my colleague Anne Hess interviewed Dr. Woods at the Breakthrough Energy Conference in Hilversum, recorded only a week or two before this detailed interview with Joanne.
This conference here, you have revealed, and you have been the most the highest aha factor came from you. And what did we see on 9/11 that we didn't see?
Well, people saw, their eyes saw what was there, but their minds didn't because they were told to see something else. And one big problem with the way us humans work is that the first impressions stick. We rely on the first information that's given to us. Another thing is that people keep asking questions until they're given an answer. They don't stop to realize that the answer makes sense.
This is not some promo to buy a book. It's an essential need to know on the use of energy weapons technology by a criminal group against the general population. A criminal and treacherous enemy that exists amongst humanity. A treacherous enemy with humanity and Mother Nature and the very existence of humanity in their sights. As the late Dean Warwick said in the opening titles, such technology was demonstrated to NATO and Warsaw Pact soldiers some 40 years ago. Warwick was to die in questionable circumstances 2 weeks later on a stage at the UK Probe Conference near Blackpool in England. These are high stakes, and it is our collective responsibility to wake up, find out what's going on, and deal with this treacherous enemy within, if we are to survive as a free-thinking people, if at all. Recorded live at Northampton University with thanks to Stuart Pound and his team, we bring you Dr. Judy Wood, Andrew Johnson with AMASH founder Joanne Summerscales. This is Miles Johnson from the AMASH Project.
Welcome to the AMASH Field Report. We're here at Northampton University with Dr. Judy Wood and Andrew Johnson. Dr. Judy Wood, of whose work I'm a great fan, wrote a great book called Where Did the Towers Go? And we're going to be exploring that today along with Andrew's book on 9/11. So, Dr. Judy Wood is a former professor of mechanical engineering, and so you may ask, what relevance does this work have to the AMASH research? Well, through Dr. Wood's extensive, exhaustive forensic research and discovery about what in fact caused the turning of 2 quarter-mile-high buildings into dust in mid-air, certainly looks at a different kind of physics, and that's what we're interested in. And so, as repeated and reported for decades, there have been flying saucers, triangles, cylinders, all kinds of objects seen. There have been beings reported of all kinds and descriptions, and these are clearly using a different kinds of physics. So that is our ground, that is our base, and where we're going to start our talk today, a different kind of physics. So I'd like to welcome now Dr. Judy Wood. Thank you very much for joining us here at Northampton University, and Andrew Johnson. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So Andrew, I know just before we talk to Dr. Judy Wood here, we've already done an introduction with you on 9/11. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that for the audience who haven't spoken or heard you speak before.
So we did the interview with the police intelligence analyst, and in that we covered some of the outline of what Dr. Wood has been researching over the last few years, and how I became familiar and what I discovered in relation to that. And the book that I compiled is called 9/11 Finding the Truth, and that's essentially about how Dr. Wood's research has been covered up, basically.
Yes.
And
yeah.
In a summary of really what we're both involved with, I suppose, Dr. Wood has reverse engineered what happened to the World Trade Center complex,
yes.
in terms of its destruction and kind of how it was destroyed, and I've kind of tried to reverse engineer some large aspects of the cover-up
yes.
of that research,
yeah.
And how they've tried to keep it down and say it isn't that, and these kinds of things. So that's essentially why we're both here, I suppose.
Lovely, thank you for that. And Dr. Wood, welcome again.
Thank you.
Perhaps you could give us just a snapshot, just at this moment in time, about your book, Where Did the Towers Go? Because that is the culmination so far on paper of a lot of research that's available for public consumption, let's say.
Well, it is the only comprehensive forensic investigation that exists in the public domain. I don't know what happens, that is classified, but
yes.
information is not classified. It's the only comprehensive forensic investigation that exists. I looked at what happened, the evidence of what happened.
Yeah.
The towers were there, then they're gone.
Sure.
Where'd they go?
Yeah.
As I say in the title.
Yeah.
And that's the question that, why isn't everyone else asking?
Yes. Yeah. So what was the springboard that set you off on this path of discovery or exploration?
I mean, beginning that day.
Yes. Yeah, indeed.
I was in the
yeah.
faculty conference room looking at these towers unraveling, and it reminded me of War of the Worlds, except now we have a television version instead of a radio version, and I looked at I didn't say anything, but I looked around the room like, you guys aren't buying this. And they looked at me like, what kind of a wacko did we hire?
Did you believe the story at any level?
No, it was like, clearly this did not make sense. This was weird. It was like somebody was playing a trick on us.
Yeah.
But nobody else in the room thought that. And that is a weird, creepy feeling.
I think that's extraordinary also because it's clear, I'm not an engineer or a scientist, but I knew myself right from the word go that something was really wrong, and it's taken your work, I have to say, to really help me put that in focus. So really, thank you for all the years.
Well, thanks. But when I looked at that, when my eyes and ears don't agree, I just turn off my ears.
Right.
I just look. And that kept me from hearing what I was told to see.
Yes.
And the other people in the room apparently were seeing what they were told to see.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was where the difference began.
Yeah.
I kept thinking, well, you know, the grown-ups are going to take care of this. Somebody else's job, not my job. And as things went on, it became clear that the grown-ups weren't going to look into this, weren't going to take care of this. And you begin to think, whose responsibility is this?
Yes.
This is our planet.
Sure.
This is our world. If no one else is looking into it, somebody's got to. So I told my mother I was going to start doing this, and she said, well, if you do that, you won't have a job. And I said, if I don't, nobody will have a job.
Yeah, because the fallout from that, just politically, economically, and on personal freedoms, is massive. I mean, Andrew, you probably have documented that quite a lot, or certainly spoken about that quite a lot as well, from the Homeland Security or the Patriot Act and God knows whatever else, and England's followed suit, and Canada, and to some degree Australia, and our personal freedoms because of that, and because of this ridiculous, you know, the war on terror mantra has become, you know, the reason or raison d'etre.
Well, without looking at even the political ramifications, as an engineer, you're interested in the truth. And that may be different than other professions, as Andrew and I have talked about.
Yeah.
That,
we both have an attitude of trying to solve the problem. We adopt a problem solver's approach, and I think one of the things you're going to bring up later in the talk is the problem solving skills, which seem to have been lost to a large proportion of the population.
But with engineering, you know, as I tell my students, if the bridge is down, it's down. You can't argue it back up.
That's right.
You start pointing fingers as to whose fault it is it's down, but it's down.
Yes.
And a lot of professions, you can sort of argue it back up. So
Sure.
let's look at the facts of what happened. You know, that's how I approached it. But also, if what happened is not being addressed by anyone, what kind of a world do we have?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
you want it based on reality. And it felt like I was in the twilight zone.
Yes, and coming forward to the NIST report, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, I think it's and technology, isn't it? Which was, I can't remember what the funding costs were for that. It was enormous, wasn't it?
There's more of what it was about.
Yes.
And there was a wonderful lawyer I met who figured out a way to get at the problem. He had seen my website and saw real evidence that could be admissible in court.
Right.
There was an avenue was a whistleblower case, but I needed to be a whistleblower.
Aha.
So I wrote a request for corrections to NIST as a whistleblower, telling them what was wrong, that the contract, you can't sue the government, but you can sue the contractors for fraud.
Right.
The contractors were helping essentially to cover up what happened.
I was going to say, just for clarification for those people who don't know what NIST is, but Andrew, perhaps you've done quite a bit of research on that. And
well, I mean,
the companies that they brought in as well.
My understanding to relate it,
contractors.
right. I mean, to relate it for a UK audience primarily is that the Department of Trade and Industry is somewhat like NIST.
Right.
So NIST is like the American equivalent of Department of Trade and Industry. And they were given a mandate by Congress to produce a technical investigation into how the towers were destroyed. Obviously, we had the 2003 9/11 Commission report, which was kind of, what agencies failed in their procedures, and who did, where were those failures, and so on, and supposed security failures. That was in the 2003 report, which they didn't want to do, and then later they had to produce technical reports, which ended up being 10,000 pages long.
That's right.
And they came, was it August 2005 or September? September 2005, wasn't it? They came out, and I think that the cost was something like $16 million or $13 million, millions of dollars basically.
Unbelievable.
And it was supposed to be, like the done deal on what happened to the World Trade Center towers, or the two towers primarily.
Yes, because they didn't.
They weren't tasked with investigating the other buildings, which I'm sure Dr. Wood will discuss later.
Yes. Because
it wasn't just the two towers that were destroyed. The whole thing went. And so, that in of itself is something that people need to look at. And I kind of, what I've said in a couple of the talks I've, done is the NIST report cost, millions of dollars. And was a dishonest investigation. If you want an honest investigation, you can have one for $40.
Yes.
So I do hope that the US government, and indeed anybody, would agree with me when I say that's pretty good value for money.
Absolutely, fantastic. It really is. So if we go as with the NIST report as a stepping stone for the whistleblower element and the testimony, then, and you brought in, I can't remember the name of the gentleman who came in and worked with the case. Is it Jerry
Leapart.
Jerry Leapart. Yes, thank you.
Very, very.
So he saw
bold.
it though. He saw that.
When he knew something was wrong. Then when he found my website,
Yeah.
oh my gosh,
It was like the light.
Right.
Great.
and it was something that it was evidence that could be admitted in court. It
Right.
was very clear evidence, and even the defendants, who were essentially the military-industrial complex,
Right.
they were the contractors on the NIST report, and they committed science fraud. I was going after them for fraud.
Yes. Yes.
And even they couldn't defend, no one has ever refuted anything I've presented.
And how long did it take you to put your case together?
I felt that I had to put it together pretty quickly because only the first person counts.
Right.
You have to be the first person to bring this forward.
Okay.
But there still hasn't been anyone else. But you never know. And I had been mentally putting it together since day one.
Yes.
And then when I decided to get into it more and more, what was on my mind
Yes.
got put in, and then I kept gathering more and more
Yeah.
information.
What was the result of that court? Because it did go to court, didn't it? It did reach.
You submit a court case, and then the opposition
Yes.
wants to get it thrown out for whatever reason they can think of. And the first case was dismissed because, they had all sorts of reasons, and they also combined my case with two others. And
I hadn't realized that.
The answer was all jumbled up, the decision was, but they were saying that, let's see, for one thing, this is one of the comments in there, the judge wasn't going to hear a case about who shot JFK or what landed on the moon. This case wasn't about those things. I think he was just confused about what case.
Yeah.
Read like an internet forum posting, this
Yeah.
judge's ruling. You can actually read if you look for it,
Wow.
you find it on the website. So yeah, it's very weird.
And claimed I was accusing the U.S. government of something, or the military of something. And I think people who know me know that, no, I'm into the evidence.
Yes.
And so we appealed to the Court of Appeals. And actually, it doesn't actually go to court. You submit it, and then there's these papers back and forth,
Yes,
arguments. And also the opposition had requested I be fined or censured for filing a frivolous case.
Frivolous.
The judge decided it was not frivolous, and they didn't get that. At the Court of Appeals, the same thing happened. The Court of Appeals didn't think it was frivolous either. But what was interesting is that the Court of Appeals really showed some respect to me.
Oh, good.
When in their written decision, they wrote that they acknowledged the law applied to my case, but dismissed the case, they're ignoring the law. Or they ignored the law to dismiss the case. And that's respectful. They didn't need to
Yes.
do that.
What was the reason at the end that they actually didn't go forward?
It just lots of stuff around circles, but this is kind of a long, involved thing. But these type of cases, the whistleblower cases, have been misinterpreted by the court. The law had been misinterpreted to require the people bringing forth such a case to prove intentional fraud, premeditated fraud. Okay, where exactly was the hour hand on the clock?
Right,
And the minute hand
okay.
clock? And where were they? And what were their exact thoughts while they were
Yeah.
thinking of this premeditated? To the point that every case essentially was being thrown out.
Right.
But because of the bailouts, Congress wanted to be sure that there wasn't these loopholes and shell games going on,
Right.
and restated the law again with FERA, Fraud Enforcement Recovery Act,
Right.
restating that what needed to be shown was that there was fraud, and that I'm the first person to bring it forward.
Right.
NIST admitted there was fraud to me, admitted their report was fraudulent. I'm still the first person that's come forward.
So when they admitted that there is fraud, they didn't do it officially. They just.
Well, they did officially.
They did.
But see,
So-
I'm not going after NIST. I'm going after the contractors.
I understand.
Because NIST is a government agency. But NIST was mandated by Congress to determine why and how the towers
Sure.
collapsed.
Yes.
Towers didn't
Which is a
collapse.
misnomer anyway.
But they didn't even investigate what happened to the towers when they quit being there. And they essentially acknowledged that to me.
Right.
They didn't investigate the collapse.
I think the wording was they investigated the events up to the point of collapse, didn't they? But not
At the point of the initiation of...
Of the initiation of collapse,
or whatever,
yeah.
You know, what they assumed the collapse
Collapse
was.
initiation, I think, was what they called it, wasn't it? Or something.
And then they presented a hypothetical scenario of what could have happened if this, and this. They didn't investigate what happened.
Right.
And the biggest thing for any kind of forensic science is to determine what happened.
Okay. Thank you for that, and we'll be back in part 2. Thanks, Dr. Judy Wood and
Thanks.
Andrew Johnson. Welcome back to this part 2 of the AMASH in the Field report with Dr. Judy Wood. We're talking about 9/11, and we're going to pick up with Dr. Wood now and hear a little bit about her background and how she got into her engineering and mechanical engineering element. And so, Dr. Wood, welcome again, and give us a bit of background. We don't know you very well in the UK, and so it'd be nice to know the person behind the professor.
Well, where should I begin?
Well, what got you started in engineering? What was your interest from a little child? I mean, just for fun. What was...
Well, I enjoyed fixing my toys and taking them apart. And in high school, I was a mechanic at a bike shop.
Oh, right.
To support my habit of bike racing.
Okay.
And my senior year of high school, I met up with this fellow who made new kinds of parts, and he had a new kind of bottom bracket. And he put it on his lathe to show me that it had less friction. He said, now feel it. Put your hand around the housing as he spun the lathe. Okay, and then put the conventional one on. Ooh, that one heated up. He said, yeah, you can feel the amount of friction. I thought that was pretty cool, that you could test a quality of it that way. So what did you take in college? And he studied civil engineering. I didn't know that wasn't civil engineering.
Right.
So I signed up for civil engineering. But I learned about structures and so forth. But then my master's degree was engineering mechanics, experimental mechanics, which is what that fellow was doing. And then my PhD was in materials engineering science, which was really more experimental mechanics, but understanding the materials while testing them.
So sorry to interrupt. Would that be materials that are under different stresses and in different conditions, and how the molecular structure behaved? Is that
right? And observing material characteristics.
Yeah.
For example, testing a new kind of material that no one has ever seen before.
Right.
Quantifying it, identifying it. I worked a lot with composite materials, and there's different kind of material systems. And if they do this kind of treatment with the fibers before they put it in the matrix, what makes it adhere to the matrix better?
Sure.
So I would test those kind of things.
Okay. So that brought you in then to your engineering arena, and I believe you taught.
Correct.
And where was your teaching? Where was your post?
At Clemson University.
Right.
I taught some at Virginia Tech as a postdoc.
Okay.
We called it Busting Lab, Strength of Materials Testing Lab, which is great fun.
And I know that you've also got an aspect, is it interferometry? Is that a separate area, or is it part of?
No, it's a type of, it's a tool that you use in experimental mechanics to measure deformations in materials. And what my PhD was in was looking at a bimaterial interface. Steel and brass bonded together, the stresses along that interface. Right. And what I found through my experimental method I developed, it contradicted all of the theoretical models to date at that time. So I'm kind of used to going against the grain. So
this put you in a prime position then to have a look at, well, in fact, to explore.
To understand what is in front of you. Also, I did a lot with image analysis. Right. So understanding how to look at images and see what information you can get from them. Yeah. And notice details. Yeah. In them. So going forward, coming forward to that day when you would have seen the towers going, and your response then, was it an immediate reaction to explore this, to start researching it? Well, my immediate response was, the story we're given doesn't add up. Right. And when my eyes and ears don't agree, I turn off my ears and my eyes look at what's there. Yeah. And what I saw was, it looked like a sweater unraveling. You know, pull yarn and the whole thing comes undone. Yes, yeah. Buildings don't collapse like that. I was in the faculty conference room at that time, and I kind of probably had this goofy look on my face, like, you guys aren't buying this. I felt like somebody was putting one over on us, like War of the Worlds was on the radio.
Yeah.
I thought this was a TV version of it.
Right.
And they looked at me like, what kind of a wacko to hire?
Yeah.
Like, whoops. And I realized that there was something different.
Did you find any colleagues at all, you know, of a similar ilk that would speak to you about your feelings?
Not then, and that was really creepy. So on that day, okay, I go up to my office. Am I insane, or is the rest of the world insane? And I start going through some mathematical equations about how long I would think it would take the building to go away.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I memorized the coefficient of gravity wrong. Let's go check those physics books. Maybe that was the typo that I mismemorized. How about this one? And pretty soon, no, there's something else going on here. And I kind of put it aside because I had my career to deal with.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's somebody else's job to do, and they'll look into it. The grown-ups will take care of it. That idea. And then it came to a point where I realized the grown-ups weren't going to take care of it. They weren't going to look into it. And I realized, whose job is it?
Yes.
This is our world.
That's true.
And it's our job to look after it. And so I decided I needed to do this.
I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of, is stepping forward to own research, to decide to go and check something out, because often these fields that both you and I are in, very different, but they really don't go with the trend. So when you come out of the box,
You're worried so much about what others think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I told my mom I was going to start doing this, and
Yeah.
she said, well, if you do that, you won't have a job. I said, well, if I don't do it, nobody will have a job.
Yeah, absolutely
And
true.
being an engineer, like we were talking about earlier, that, you know, if the bridge is down, it's down.
Yes.
So why is it that no one else was caring about what is real and what's not real and what is happening?
Yeah.
And I proceeded from there,
Yeah.
just looking at it, collecting data, looking at the data. And part of my philosophy is you look at the evidence carefully enough. It'll tell you exactly what happened.
Yeah.
If you don't know what happened, keep listening to the evidence until you do.
How did you? What was it that you thought you were seeing? The building's gone. Did you have an idea then, sort of pretty much immediately, of how that could have been achieved? Because we hadn't had any official report in the early days. Obviously, that was still in being compiled.
Well, there was one particular report I remember that was about 24 hours after the event. It's
Yeah.
on the 12th, where Peter Jennings is in the studio and George Stephanopoulos is at the site. And Peter Jennings says, well, George, we've been asking where did all the rubble go? And George Stephanopoulos says, well, I've been asking that too. And one volunteer, Robert Gerlinski, explains that it all fell down to the ground, was pulverized, and then evaporated. Well, wonderful. I thought that was great because somebody else noticed the lack of debris.
Yeah.
But that was the last time we heard anything
I
about
like the
it.
evaporation. That's great. Absolutely. Well,
But what he was capturing is that
Yeah.
there was a lack of debris
Yeah.
there.
because if we look at it, was it 110 stories?
Each of the two towers.
Yes. So you would how much debris would we expect to see then? Do you think, or would generally on a demolition, normal pancake demolition kind of?
more than ground level.
Yeah.
There's an ambulance. There's a picture of an ambulance parked in front of the front door.
I've seen
and there's
it.
no building behind it.
I know.
And
I
so
mean, really,
you
it's
know
ang-
that there's not enough. It doesn't matter how much
Yeah.
there should be.
Yeah.
You can look at other building collapses, like from controlled demolition, where they gut out the building, so there's nothing much left
Yeah.
in the building. It's just the, bare bones.
Yes.
And well, think of a bunch of pickup sticks. You know, the kids' toys.
Yeah.
So everything's haphazard. It's
Yeah.
going to make a pile.
Yeah.
But what was left? If you started counting beams, you could almost count everyone that was there.
Yeah. Because we were talking about steel beams, and there were 47 of them, weren't there? Sort of the integral core.
Oh, there's 47 core beams,
ones.
and then there's 59 per side
Yeah.
from the outside,
And you really saw hardly
and a
any.
quarter mile of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was your feeling then? What could have? How long was it before you came to some conclusion about how that could have happened?
Well, as the building's frothing up into dust,
Yes.
and there's little debris left, but we're not familiar with, maybe that's a trick. And I just started collecting data as though I was on the site.
Yeah.
If I didn't understand what I was saying, okay, go look at other data. But if all the data is consistent, all the images are consistent with the other piece of evidence, there's a whole lot of it's not just images that I looked at. There's
I mean, you looked at
seismic
over 40,000 images, I believe. Is that,
right,
Yeah.
but also the seismic signals.
Yes.
And
perhaps we could just mention that a bit, because the seismic signals were picked up in Alaska, and was there somewhere else?
That's the magnetic field.
Okay,
but it's the inverse for the seismic signals. The Palisades seismic recording station,
Right.
which is fairly close, about 20 miles away.
Yes.
Earlier that year, there was an earthquake in Midtown Manhattan. That was picked up just fine.
Yeah.
Same bedrock that the towers sit on.
Yeah.
The signal from the tower's demise did not travel through the Earth. There is an S wave and a P wave, the primary wave and the secondary wave, and the space between the arrival times tells you how far away the epicenter is.
Yes.
Because they travel at different speeds through the Earth.
Sure.
When the towers went away, there was no S wave or P wave. It did not travel through the Earth. It was only a surface wave. And you get that when you lift the buildings off the ground. You no longer have that weight there. It's gone. Like when you get up off your mattress in the
Yes.
morning, the mattress recovers.
Yes, yeah.
That's like a surface wave. But like pulling a rubber band and snapping it, that pulse
Yeah.
primary wave is that type of signal. Or a jump rope, that kind of wave is the secondary wave.
Yes.
And they travel at different speeds through the Earth. But there was
nothing recorded at all
for
that.
Either of the towers or Building 7.
Yes. And Building 7, NIST didn't even mention in the report, I understand.
They had a second report for that.
Oh, right, okay, but not the
They
major one.
took it out of the first report and put it in a separate report.
Okie doke. All right. So going to the Alaskan, the magnet.
The Earth's magnetic.
Yes. That showed certainly something
strange
occurred.
Some might argue pure coincidence, but there are 5 main events that happened that day. The North Tower got a hole in it, South Tower got a hole in it, South Tower went away, North Tower went away, then Building 7 went away. Each of those 5 events, there was an abrupt change in the Earth's magnetic field, as recorded at 6 different magnetic recording stations. It could be coincidence, but it's mighty strange.
Yeah, it is mighty strange. And also there has been no explanation of that, is there? Or
No.
I haven't heard any.
No.
Have you an explanation of what could have caused that anomaly?
Well, if there's something going on that has a magnetic component to it,
Okay.
it might be,
Yes.
the result of it rather than the cause.
Another major factor, again, which for me just really anchored, your research on this, was what's called the bathtub, the foundation footings, for want of a better term, of which were 70 foot tall.
70 foot deep.
Oh, tall, yes.
Right.
And they were. I think they had very, very little damage, if any. I haven't seen any damage on them, but
there was no water leaking through. The bathtub. Well, the towers were built in the Hudson River because
on reclaimed land from the Hudson River.
Right, because bedrock was 70. That's 7 times 10, 70 feet below the water table.
Yeah.
And they built the towers on that bedrock, but that's 70 feet down. So they built this dike around it that they call the bathtub. It's sort of the inverse. It keeps the water out rather than in.
Yeah.
And the tower, the bathtub begins sort of at the old shoreline, out the distance.
Yes.
But 70 feet down. And if that dike had been ruptured, you have all sorts of subways that connect in there. And all of Lower Manhattan would have been flooded.
Yeah.
That didn't happen.
And that's a sizable area too.
Yeah.
And also talking about the trains and those underground tunnels, again, I believe there was virtually no damage or minimal damage.
Yeah, there was some here and there, but
Yeah.
when they excavated down, well, there's some pictures of the PATH train terminal.
Yes.
The PATH trains are the subways that go over to the Jersey side.
Yes.
They were built in 1900 something, before 1910.
Yeah.
Maybe they built things better back then.
Yeah.
It could hold up.
Yeah.
And there's pictures of FEMA going down. They put red
Yes.
X's on things, count how many bodies they recovered or injured people, whatnot. They have those red X's on the subway car. Everything's intact.
Yes.
There's water on the platform, but you have fire hoses and you have
Sure. Yeah.
things are open. The earth moving equipment that came in to help clean up the area, and within a day or so they brought in earth moving equipment.
Yeah.
that began to damage the bathtub.
Interesting.
But 2 500,000-ton buildings crashing down didn't?
That was just my next point I was going to ask or make. The fact is, had it been any kind of demolition in the conventional sense, the bathtub would have had to have been affected.
As a matter of
deeply.
fact, the remains of Building 6. Building 6 lost the middle approximate 50%.
Yes.
And it was an 8-story building next to Tower 1. The westernmost portion of it, when they're going to take it down, they didn't put bombs in it. They used cables to pull it down because they're afraid of damaging that bathtub wall.
How interesting. And I tell you what's also very interesting, Dr. Wood, is that they brought not only the earth-moving equipment, but they brought loads of earth onto... Now, I know we're perhaps jumping ahead into what was going on and why they would be doing that, but that's just another...
There's a whole wide range of things.
bonkers kind of thing.
But
because it was fuming, wasn't it? After the event,
Right.
whatever this event was, and we'll talk about that in a moment or two, there was this continual fuming that went on for weeks, and all this dirt being shipped in.
What I like to begin is that saying the towers didn't burn up or slam to the ground, but turned into dust in midair.
Yes.
And we know that because not just seeing it, but if they'd slammed to the ground, you'd have this pile of stuff left over.
Sure.
You'd have a broken bathtub.
Yeah.
You'd have a seismic recording of it. Those things didn't happen, so we know it turned to dust in midair. When the dust landed, it's apparent that the dust continued breaking down and then began to rise up. It became finer and finer, and it got to the size of approximately DNA, a hundredth of the size of red blood cells.
Wow. I hadn't
Mask,
realised
we're
that.
going to keep it in.
That
Keep it
is-
out. People inhaled it right into their bloodstreams.
Wow.
All the constituents of the buildings.
Right.
And that includes organic matter.
Right. Well, hold that thought because we're going to come back for
Okay.
the next part. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really fascinating. Look forward to the next part. Join us then. And welcome to part 3 of our talk with Dr. Judy Wood, who's here at Northampton University, and we're taking the opportunity of having a little chat with her about 9/11, those anomalous events and the physics behind it. Dr. Wood, thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you for caring about this subject.
It's so important. I think one of the most important things is that our perceptions have been changed, our perceptions have been managed, and this is absolutely incredible to me. Now I am kind of hopefully wide awake to that 9/11 event. But you were telling me that the dust particles went down to the size of DNA, which I hadn't actually realised, which is phenomenal. And people were breathing that in, and we know that there was so much sickness and illness with first responders.
Every constituent of the building was dustified.
Yeah.
I use a unique word because we've never seen this happen before, so we don't have a word for that. The buildings turned to dust.
Yes.
They were dustified. We need a new word for that phenomenon.
Yeah, and there was no pancaking, there was no clear demolition, because otherwise we wouldn't have had the results that we have. And also, not only that, this is maybe a slight sidebar, but it is to do with whatever brought these buildings down or was used, was the fact that the other buildings seem to be infected with a kind of dissociative, corrosive, inducing...
The process continued.
...problem. So perhaps you could mention that, because I think that is really interesting.
One thing about investigating this, it's so important to stay with what you know that you know.
Yeah.
And what I know is what the evidence shows. And don't go beyond that, and just continue to collect the evidence. Don't make conclusions beyond what the evidence shows.
Sure.
But what the evidence shows is these buildings turned to dust, and the dust continued breaking down. And buildings nearby, a couple of them, had this problem where, like Bankers Trust, had that gash in the front. They repaired the gash, and then they took some dust studies and decided they needed to dismantle the building.
The entire building?
Just after they repaired it.
Yeah.
It took about 10 years.
So, and that, whatever dissociation or whatever corrosion was going on was fast acting, as I understand it, as well.
It was something that didn't seem to be stopping.
Yeah, yeah.
And they, had a difficulty with that. Also, there's other weird qualities of this event. we've kind of covered the bare bones of it.
Yeah.
But looking at the dust itself and also different measurements that were taken there, there's a nuclear reaction of some sort going on. Not normal nukes. There was no Geiger counter going off the chart.
Right.
Alerts. People around the world would have measured that.
Yes.
But there was tritium.
Right. Tell us about tritium.
Tritium is an isotope of hydrogen, and it's only found in nuclear processes.
Oh, right.
And so there's some nuclear process going on there. It's very similar to what was termed cold fusion.
Oh, yes.
Which
yes.
is a type of free energy.
Yes, yes, indeed.
But it shows that something strange is going on. Also transmutation, elements changing, materials changing into other materials.
Yeah.
And some of these effects have been reproduced in labs. Again, I don't know exactly what Gizmo did this, but we can reproduce it.
Right.
Reproduce all of the effects. And notice the physics involved in that, but it was something we've never seen before.
Right. And the other great anomaly too, well, there's many anomalies, but there was a great lack of porcelainware, white goods, like wash basins, toilets. Where were
There should have
they?
been about 3,000 toilets there, and they're
There
easy
were-
to spot.
there were
Big
none, were
ceramic
there?
thing. Not even one found. Not
No.
even a piece of one.
And there was a huge marble facade as well.
The
as
marble,
part-
right, the marble facade on the WFC, the World Financial Center buildings, there's 3 of them across the street.
Yeah.
All the marble facades went away. But the most fascinating anomaly to most people is the toasted cars.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. Let's come on to the
1,400
cars.
toasted cars, and I say toasted, not burned, because I don't know if they were burned. There was some weird thing that happened to them. What I mean by toast is they're toast, they're history.
Right, yes.
You got to get another one. You can't fix this when it's too
Yeah.
far gone. But there's 1,400 at least.
And also some of those cars weren't even nearby. I mean, they were, they weren't right under it. They were maybe half a mile away, maybe somewhere further away. I'm not sure now. I can't remember the information on that.
And they appeared to be in spontaneous combustion, something similar to that.
Yeah.
When one of the towers was going away, the dust goes up, blocks out 100% of the sunlight, so you can't see your hand in front of your face.
Yes.
And as this first responder said, thank goodness that car lit up because now I could see where I was. And he was making his way up the street and cars were lighting up as he passed them.
What could cause a vehicle to spontaneously combust? I mean, there aren't any, it hasn't been, there's no fires. I mean, there were fires, but there were no fires.
They weren't hot. The paper didn't burn. All
Yeah,
this paper all over the place
exactly.
didn't burn.
There was all that paper. It was strewn with paper.
And people assume, because it looks like a fire or you see something glowing that it
Yeah.
must be hot. But when you have paper not burning, you realize it's glowing for a different reason.
Yes.
And we do know of something that glows. Hot things do glow, but not everything that glows is hot. Think of fluorescent light bulbs versus
Yeah.
incandescent light bulbs.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a different process going on.
Yeah, yeah. And also what was interesting about the cars is, again, like the Bankers Trust building that had to be pulled down, there seemed to be a huge rapid corrosion going on the rusting of the cars. And also some of the cars, and you tell me otherwise because you've done the research, some of their soft areas, like the tyres, were still inflated, not burned, obviously, because they were still inflated. But there were some of the window trimmings also intact where the doors would be.
It wasn't heat related, like this police car that's totally toasted in the front end, passenger door, totally toasted right up to that line. The back passenger door looks like in pristine condition from the showroom floor. And the inside, totally toasted, like it had some rip-roaring fire in it. That's what it looks like. But the police lights on top, the plastic lights,
Intact.
intact. So it wasn't that hot.
Yes, and also it obviously had a boundary. It
Yes,
obviously
abrupt boundaries.
abrupt boundary.
And you don't
yes.
see that with fire.
No.
With fire, you get black, white, shades of gray in between. You don't get, rip-roaring
Stop,
fire
start.
and then a nanometer over pristine condition.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you were talking again or mentioning, there are various trees in these areas.
Trees didn't get toasted.
The trees didn't get toasted.
Buildings didn't get toasted.
Oh.
The signposts didn't get toasted. Neither did the traffic lights. And this one particular road, West Broadway, for 4 blocks north of the Trade Center complex, I think every car had at least some portion, maybe all of it was toasted, maybe some of it was toasted down there. And from the helicopter view of it, that area, none of the adjacent buildings had anything on them. So if someone's going to say the cars were ignited by falling debris, why did it just fall down that canyon between the buildings and only hit the vehicles?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
It's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, it just nothing adds up. Certainly not.
And there was a medical technician who was driving on the Manhattan Bridge, 3/4 of a mile away, who said you could feel the heat from the bridge. It could not have been conventional heat because paper wasn't even burning next to the Trade Center.
Yeah. So what's your opinion of that? What's your view of what could
everything there? I didn't have measurements on that day at that time, but everything that happened that day, all of the weird anomalies, are reproduced in a lab.
Yeah. And we talked about, or you've mentioned as well, that wonderful Canadian inventor, John Hutchison.
He went to reproduce some of Nikola Tesla's work.
Yes.
See, Nikola Tesla is no longer here. I'd have to go back in time to visit Nikola Tesla. But here today, I can go visit John Hutchison and see him reproduce all these effects.
Can you tell us about some of the steel, the incredible anomalies that we've seen in the steel that John Hutchison has reproduced, or that he's talked about, and then we see it there, rather?
There's one particular one that I think is kind of funny. It's a solid steel rod that looks like it's doing sit-ups. And it turns to like Jell-O, and it's doing sit-ups. And there's another one that just comes apart, another one that starts fuming and crumbling, and weird things. Sometimes he just gets levitation. He gets lift or disruption. We had flip cars or toasted cars.
And we actually did get levitation, didn't we? We had, I don't know if about car. I think there was one or two cars actually levitated, weren't they?
Yeah, flipped. It was parked in the right place, just upside down.
Yes, and I remember seeing one somehow up there in some kind of area, but like it had been lifted and like a hurricane had lifted it up and whizzed it up there somehow.
That's another interesting thing about hurricanes. Hurricanes and tornadoes, we see things lifted, and most people think of those as got sucked up or blown.
Yes.
There's it was April 3rd this past spring, a bunch of tornadoes in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Oh yes.
And there's these trucks that just levitated up, a couple hundred feet in the air, maybe at least 100 feet in the air. Big tractor-trailer trucks that just went floating up, and then they fell out of whatever field we're in and came down. Right. But some of them didn't even crash land. They were set down gently.
Oh, right.
And that's the type of levitation.
Yeah.
It's a field effect.
Yes, I know that there was Hurricane Erin off New York.
Oh, what a coincidence.
Off New York. And I can't remember the details now. Perhaps you can help me with that one. How far the Hurricane Erin was before it did a right angle turn all by itself.
Head out of town.
I mean, it's
for 4 days, it was headed in a straight line towards New York City. It was born on September 1st, 2001. Mm-hmm. It actually had more cyclonic energy in the storm system than Hurricane Katrina. It was, anyway, the 4 days prior to 9/11, headed towards Manhattan directly, and that's unusual. Usually they swish up the hill of the coastline, not
and it's funny how we all heard loads about Katrina, and I don't actually think I heard anything about Erin.
Oh, entirely. So here it is. The Weather Service has these text messages they keep on record, and they think it's going to turn around. This is 4 days before 9/11. They think it's going to turn around that day, because there's this high pressure system moving in from the west, and they think that'll turn around. It doesn't turn around day one. Okay, it's going to turn around day two. Doesn't turn around day two. Going to turn around day three. Doesn't turn around day three. Going to turn around day four. Thank goodness it did, because there's no more room. It was right off the end of Long Island, and it was close enough that you get field effects from hurricanes.
Yes,
people feel storms coming. Birds know to head for cover.
Absolutely, yeah.
The three major airports surrounding Manhattan, LaGuardia Airport, Newark Airport, and JFK Airport, all three of those airports recorded thunder on 9/11.
Right, interesting. Do you think there is any possibility that, I've heard, I don't know, it was you talking about it or another piece of information about how hurricanes can be used like a Tesla coil in a way to somehow generate a further field or
well, that's sort of what they are. They go round and round.
Right.
Round,
okay.
round
So if I'm not understanding it completely.
So you have the static field outside of it, and that's what people feel a storm coming.
Yes.
There's an electrical energy type field around it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what effect could that have had on 9/11? Could it have been used in any way as a control mechanism for, being party to?
Well, I know how John Hutchison creates these exact same effects.
Yeah.
All the same effects on a much smaller scale.
Yes.
He uses a Tesla coil or a Van de Graaff generator to create a static
All right.
field.
Yeah.
And within that static field, he interferes various radio frequency signals.
Yes.
And that creates these effects. I can't say for certain what this was used for.
No.
It could have been used for it.
Yes.
I wasn't in the control room.
It's just unusual, isn't it? I mean, and also.
But to have no one know about it, that's the most bizarre part of it.
And the fact that it went off at 90 degrees.
Then it made a U-turn, head out of town.
I mean, yeah, fed up with this one.
It stayed hurricane status throughout that.
Yeah.
It dropped down to Category 1, packed up, and stayed at Category 1 till the 17th, I think.
Right, okay. And again, we hear nothing about it.
And it was that close. I have a photograph looking eastward at Manhattan. You see all the fuming coming up?
Yes, yeah.
It was on 9/11, and you see the outer bands of Hurricane Aaron off in the distance. Another thing that few people realize is that, I think it was the 14th and 15th when George Bush went to visit this site.
Right.
Remember it was raining?
Okay, yes.
That was the backside of Hurricane Aaron.
Oh, right. Oh, interesting. And I do remember reading also, and probably in your book, that the astronauts at the International Space Station could see the terrorist carnage, but could not see hurricane.
We're looking up and down the East Coast to see if there's anything else we can see. And they had to, carefully arrange their video camera to not get the clouds on the right and to avoid the hurricane.
I know. I mean, for goodness sake. Okay.
It's just curious.
I know.
It's just interesting. Another coincidence that
it's very curious. I tell you what's also very curious are these unusual holes that appeared in some of the glass, the windows, and some of the buildings. They were kind of round.
I categorize both of them differently. There's the rounded holes in the window glass.
Yeah.
Sometimes only in the outer pane, while the inner pane is still intact. If you throw
Do you know what? I hadn't realised that either. That's interesting.
It's bizarre. You throw a baseball through a window, it makes a spiderweb pattern.
Yes.
I'd love to see a high school student say, teacher, the physics teacher, my baseball makes a spiderweb pattern. How do you do this?
Yeah.
It turns out you do it with longitudinal waves. That, too, has been reproduced in the lab.
Yeah.
That longitudinal waves make rounded holes through window glass.
Right. So, but
It's a different process than regular breakage. Regular breakage, glass is brittle.
Yes.
Brittle material is weak in tension. So if you hit something, the outer surface is being stretched and it shatters.
Okie doke. So what about then those much bigger holes in the round holes?
They look like a post hole digger.
They do, yes. They're really.
There's an analogous thing that John Hutchison has in his samples.
Oh, okay.
Where it looks like there's, imagine a line in space where at a radial distance from that line, everything is just dustified. And he has an example of this in a solid piece of aluminum, an aluminum bar, and it doesn't start and stop, it doesn't go through the ends, it just starts and stops in the middle of the thing. And he's got a hole from the surface down in. You look and it's this hole bore through there, but how did how does that happen?
Yeah. So these are reproducible. We've seen it, you've seen it, but we don't know yet how this was created.
People often
9/11.
ask, well, where was the gizmo?
Where's the gizmo?
And what I often tell people is, you have a cell phone?
Yeah, of course.
When you make a cell phone call, do you know where the tower is that you're connected to?
No.
You know that you're within range.
Yes.
That's all you care about.
Yeah.
You have to have a cell phone that works, and you have to be within range of the cell phone tower.
So do we think...
And so if you have something that kind of covers the area, like a cell phone tower, a static field,
Okay.
and you interfere whatever within that static field.
Right. We're going to bring in Andrew to help us discuss this further in just a few moments. Thank you, Dr. Judy Wood.
Thank you.
And we'll be back for the next section.